Hi, everybody, and welcome to Hell is for Children. This show is on every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is 9 p.m. or 2100 hours Central European Time. My name is Geerte Frenken, and this show is all about the topic of protective mothers and their children. So you might ask yourself, what is a protective mother? Well, a protective mother tries to protect her child or children from their abusive fathers by many means necessary, which is an uphill battle in today's global corrupt family court system that thrives on paternal entitlement. Now, mainstream media, when they talk about human trafficking, they often portray traffickers as strangers who kidnap children. But what they don't cover is judicial child trafficking, which happens via the family court system and child protective services. My own daughter is a victim of judicial child trafficking, and after her abductions 2 years ago, I quickly came to realize that her case is not an exception. Academic research shows that there are an estimated 2 million protective mothers in the United States alone. And these researchers admit that this is a conservative number. And like I said, it's a global problem, so the amount of protective mothers dealing with maternal deprivation worldwide is staggering. We are facing a downright pandemic. So in order to bring awareness to this topic, I started this show in February of 2016 on Blog Talk Radio, and previous episodes of the show can be found on my website, which is www.freejasmine.com, and that's spelled FREEJASMIJN.com. In each show, I aim to highlight a different aspect of the topic of protective mothers, and my guests can share their own experiences, thoughts, feelings, and ideas, as my role is just to facilitate the discussion. I'm very honored that CCN TV has invited me to host this show on their network so we can expand our audience in an effort to raise awareness and also offer each other support and brainstorm about solutions with anyone who has input on this topic as we fight for the right to protect and raise our children. So thank you, CCN Live TV. Without further ado, today's guest is protective mother Coral Anika Theill, who lost custody of her 8 children, including her nursing infant, by coercive control through the patriarchal, fundamental, evangelical Christian church cult and the Oregon judicial system when she sought safety and reported crimes committed by her abusive ex-husband. Hi, Coral. Welcome to Hell's for Children. Can you share with the audience what happened to you as a protective mother and how your children were trafficked through this extremist Christian church cult and the Oregon judicial system?
Yes, it's nice to be with you. Thank you, Geerte. I sought a divorce in 1996, 20 years ago, in Oregon. It was Polk County, Oregon, Dallas, Oregon. And I sought an attorney in October, and things went pretty poorly after that. But I might want to back up a little bit to just describe my marriage and just the situation of people around me. My ex-husband was very drawn to extreme fundamental Christian cults. Some people may not understand what that is, but if you want to go to my website at www.coranikathill.com, you can maybe look up some of the blogs, or my book is also available at the website to read for free. But I was surrounded by many pastors, elders, Christians, some Christian cults that their whole ideology was about the oppression of women and children and the absolute obedience of women. Some of these were Catholic charismatic cults, Baptist, Evangelical, Missionary Alliance. My ex-husband also was into home church. Then he was involved in the Sacred Name movement, the Yahweh movement, and also bought a computer from Hewlett-Packard for a new Bible to be made for the world. He was involved in a cult in Africa that wanted to use just the names of God in Hebrew. So there was a lot of oppressive people in my life, and I had very little rights. I was quite isolated from family and friends for years, and my ex-husband also was involved in the Mary Pride, kind of the Bill Gothard and the Quiverful movement, to where no contraceptives were allowed and you were to have every child that God intended for you. This involved a time when I was blind in 1987. I could not see. My eyes were taped, and I had incredible difficulties with my eyes, and the doctors shared with my ex-husband not to get me pregnant, but he did, and I was pregnant with my 5th child in 1987 while I could not see. And so there was incredible difficulties and stress, and I would leave these cults and I'd be incredibly harmed. I'd be taken in the middle of the night to be interrogated by cult leaders. And I really had nobody on the outside other than people like my ex-husband. Some of his friends were also incredibly abusive. And so the years went by, and just from a lot of work and lack of sleep and coercive control is the word you use, basically psychological torture, I broke down in the spring of 1993 after a home birth of my 7th child. I was not allowed medical care. I hemorrhaged, and I had very little left of me. And my breakdown was a postpartum depression. For 20 months, I was nearly catatonic and could not care for myself. I could not sleep. I could not shower myself, dress myself, and I was living out of state with my brother and a few friends, but my ex-husband did think it was right to also use me sexually during that time. He'd call my brother ahead of time and ask him to get me ready to dress me up, and he'd pick me up, take me to a motel and have sex with me. And I did get pregnant during that period where I could not care for myself, and I was physically and mentally incapacitated. And that's against the law. Even marital rape laws passed in 1993. One baby died, and my 8th child, I was 5 months along in January of 1995 when I came back to myself, being able to care for myself and the children and back in the home. And my doctor, Dr. Charles South of Albany, Oregon, saw me, and I never had heard him swear, but he told me to go get the best effing attorney I could find and divorce me. And he had some choice words for my ex-husband. He had followed me through calls during that time. My ex-husband would not allow me to see people I knew. Even my DNC was done at a different hospital, so my doctor, who had cared for me for 16 years, did not know about it. But I did follow my doctor's advice after my 8th child was born. And I did have a friend from Longview, Washington, Addie Archer, who came in the fall of October 1995 and helped watch my children while I went and saw an attorney in Salem, Oregon. Also during this time, while I was out of the home, my ex-husband's mother-in-law took care of the children. That was my worst nightmare. And during that time, my daughters were sexually molested. And when I came back in the home, they asked for my help. It was another member of the family. And so that's why I saw an attorney in the first place. I was threatened by Pastor Bill Hurd from Roseburg, Oregon, and my ex-husband, or husband at that time, in the fall of 1995, and other pastors of his in the area, that I could not report the crimes to the police. I could not take my daughters to a doctor or to go get counseling. They were 3 and 5 at the time, and they did need a lot of help. So I was threatened. My ex-husband and Pastor Bill Hurd even threatened to put me in a mental hospital if I did not start obeying and acting right. So the whole thrust of the 20 years of my marriage was total obedience to things against my will, to even spiritual abuse, ritual abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, mental, and even my children. He used belts, fists, and even fraternity boards to discipline them, and I was beaten one time during one of these pregnancies in 1994. 4, I was beaten because I asked him not to have his mother watch the children because I knew her own children had been severely sexually abused for years under her care, and I did not feel she was good for my children, and my fears were lived out. And so I ended up in a different room than where I was standing while I was pregnant and broken. So those years were pretty severe, and I was thankful I did heal and did seek an attorney, but the 20 years since then have almost been more severe than the 20 years of my marriage. I was told by doctors and also the attorney and counselors to, well, we had a marital rape case in January of 1996 initially, and I had a restraining order for 2 weeks. His pastors, Pastor Ron Sutter of the Missionary Alliance Church in Monmouth, Oregon, he lived with this pastor during those 2 weeks and another elder. They fully supported him, even knowing the crimes that were going on in our home, even knowing about my ill health and the pregnancies. So basically, in short, in the last 20 years, there have been pastors, elders, churches throughout the Oregon area, and my children, and adult children, and now son-in-laws that fully support my ex-husband. And I have been taken to court for 20 years and legally stalked. I've been in court 45 times. I've been sued. I've lived in my car for 3 years. And I was sued at one hearing in 99 for twice that I earned as a disabled woman, which put me in further poverty. Even that year in 2004, while I was living out of my car, my ex-husband appealed our case to the Oregon State of Appeals and wanted to seek $50,000 more. I was totally destitute and homeless. So for a year, I worked on a legal brief, and finally that case was dismissed. And then he's just continued to sue me for more child support. I've had a woman judge, Judge Paula Brownhill, who's received an achievement award. She's from Astoria, Oregon, and she's fully supported my ex-husband. There was a case in 2003 where my son, who was about 16 at the time, Joshua, found my email through a cousin of his who had read my published memoir, and he began writing me and asking me if I'd attend his games. And I tried to attempt to tell him that I lost visitation in 99, and I didn't have tens and tens of thousands of dollars to do anything more in court, but I would love to attend his game. It was at a public place, and I said, I just can't talk to you. That would be against the visitation, lack of visitation order. So I went to his game in 2003 in the fall, and he ran off the field and hugged me and talked to me. And he had been emailing me for several months, several times a day. And so I hugged him. I did not act in a strange way. I ran away from my own son, but I received contempt orders that week and then was threatened with jail time. I was sued, and Judge Paula Brownhill signed a court order, even something my ex-husband didn't ask for, prohibiting me from ever writing my minor children, phoning them, ever seeing them, or contacting them through a third party. So in December of 2003, I had to give away their Christmas gifts, and I no longer ever wrote them. I know they were young at the time, and they don't know what happened. I want to add to this part of the interview, too, that yesterday I interviewed a friend for this program. He was a fraternity brother of my ex-husband and went to college with my ex-husband in Pullman, Washington. They were in the same fraternity together, and he stood up in our wedding in 1976. We had a huge wedding. There was 1,000 people there. It was at the Catholic Church, St. Mary's Catholic Church in Corvallis, Oregon. Anyway, I interviewed Glenn Schmatter. He said I could use his name. And he told me that for 16 years after my divorce, my ex-husband had told him that I was mentally ill and had a breakdown, and I was institutionalized. So I called him 4 years ago just to say hello, and he and his wife ordered my book that night. And they were very aware in their personal lives about domestic violence, and they read the documentation. And he called my ex-husband and confronted him, and he asked him to dismiss all the outrageous summary judgments against me that have caused a lot of legal problems being sued for twice that you make. There's a now outstanding 4,500 summary judgment against me even 20 years later, and there's been a lot of legal problems from that. But my ex-husband said he would never do that, and so Glenn basically has not had much contact with him since. But he used to call several times a year, and he never knew that I'd lost my children, that I was being dragged through court every few months. And even in 2012, my ex-husband told the church community in Monmouth, Oregon, that I had committed suicide and I was dead, all the while he was taking me to court. Sadly, my children are around all this, and I feel really badly for them. My children have been brainwashed to hate and despise me. I've received dozens of hate letters through the years telling me I'm a tool of Satan, that I'm being used and will be tossed aside, and I'm not under the blood of Jesus. They're being raised by Christian school teachers at Saniam Christian School, is where they also received a lot of this type of help, and through their churches all helped my ex-husband in telling them that I was wicked, evil, for divorcing their father. And so there's a theme of this too that we need to address, where our patriarchal religion in our society really plays out in these kinds of situations when a woman wants to become safe. In short, there's a time when we know that we will be dead. Even Dr. Charles Self said in a few months you will be dead. And I knew that. I knew that I was had very little left and time. And you want to disappear. You want to be safe. Oprah tells us that America is the safest place in the world, and that is not true. For millions of us, we know that that's not true. And when we seek safety, there was no safe household helping me. All the friends disappear. Your family shuns you. And often many of us do end up homeless. So what I'm sharing is our patriarchal court system, even these patriarchal Christian schools. This was Saniam Christian School in Corvallis, Oregon, who has very little oversight from the state because they're a private school. But my ex-husband used the school to assist him. And I had women call me from the school that told me that my own child was, the teacher on Mother's Day had him stand up the week of Mother's Day and told the parents there and the children that my son had been abandoned by his mother. Oh. I was in the same city 10 minutes away, but I had been revoked. I was not allowed to go to any more school functions. I asked for the report cards, and I even had to get an attorney to ask for that because they wouldn't acknowledge me. The administration was rude, and it's even rude to this day. So
it's unlawful too. You know, the schools are, by law, they have to give you the report cards. I mean, I don't get any report cards for my daughter either. That school is also breaking the law, but just for the listeners who are also in this type of situation, there's all these laws, but no one's adhering to them, right?
That's right. And so it's been quite a journey, and I know for all the women and their friends and family who have helped them, hopefully there's a lot of you that have helped, but so many of us end up alone. Even our friends just tell us, move on. Your kids are older now, move on, while they have all their children and grandchildren around them. And basically I will say that this is an incredible psychic shock to go through. I will state that in the fall, winter of 1996, 20 years ago, when I was seeking safety, the restraining order was overturned by Judge Collins, another judge who's been awarded Judge of the Year through the Crime Victims Program. And he overturned my restraining order with even all the witnesses going in front of him, even expressing dismay that my ex-husband didn't ever have any appropriate boundaries to me, that I had become pregnant, even during a catatonic breakdown stroke that I had experienced. And he acknowledged that, but he just overturned the restraining order. So I went home to a place that was like a fortress. When I got home, I did get a different lock on my bedroom door. I got a phone and a refrigerator, and I was supposed to wait out for 3 months before my next court hearing. I did not want to be raped. I did not want to be pregnant. And I had a nursing infant and my young children with me, and the household with his mother-in-law became a place that was not livable for me. So I did seek safety, and a judge, even another judge, Judge Norblad, who's now deceased, but he was the seventh judge in my case. My ex-husband and his attorney did judge shopping, which is against the law, but they found Judge Norblad, who takes away babies and children from good mothers for 30 years, and I've heard from many, many of them. They find my book, and Judge Norblad's part of my story, so they find me, and even to the time of his passing away a couple years ago, I was hearing from women up to that week who had lost their children through him. But he did allow me to live in hiding a few months before the court hearings in March of 1996. And so he was aware of all the abuse through my doctors, friends, neighbors, and even at the court hearing, then at the end of February and March, it was a 3-day hearing, and Judge Norblad said, I've read all 6 of her psychiatric reports. She's been well for over a year and in the home. The doctors say she is now well, and I have no problem with leaving her children with her. And he said, if you want to have a 3-day hearing, you may go ahead. Sadly, those 3 days were about humiliating me about my sexual abuse for years as a child, humiliating me about the breakdown. The judge laughed about the rapes I suffered during my breakdown and the pregnancies, that I got pregnant easy, even though this is against the law to use a woman who's catatonic and cannot care for herself. It was disgusting 3 days, and then before that time, I was in 45 hours of depositions that cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars per hour. And they, again, put a camera foot from my face, and for 45 hours, 5 days, I was humiliated and treated in such a way that it's very hard to discuss even now. But
did you have an attorney at that time?
I did. I had 2 or 3 of them at the time. They were the best. I was told Mr. David Geerte in Portland, Oregon. But anyway, they were my attorneys at that time. That was in 96 and 97 was the last time I had attorneys. I've been representing myself the other 19 years due to poverty from this case. But in March, I was told during the court that the judge was leaving my children with me. It was very distressing. My friends were walking my baby outside the courtroom. My ex-husband's pastors and friends were there, and his whole family, who had not seen me much because he kept me so isolated. They were all there to help their brother, and sadly, they even saw me during the period I was broken down a couple years before, and saw me pregnant, like that's a normal thing for a woman who can't hardly feed herself, sleep, clothe herself, shower, that now she's pregnant, and they all celebrated that too. It's obscene. But anyway, on March 10th, before the court hearing ended at the beginning of March, and on March 10th, I was called while I was staying with my brother with my youngest 3 children, and my attorney in Portland, Oregon, Mr. David Geerte, read the court order that I had lost custody of all my children, including my nursing infant. I will never know why the judge changed that. He knew about all the abuse, and I was living in hiding up to that time.
So you think he was friends with your ex-husband?
I don't know. It was just his habit of taking children and babies from nurturing mothers for all these years. So I drove back to Corvallis, Oregon, and stayed with friends for a couple days, and custody evaluators called me for a few days, making sure I wasn't going to run. And I knew that would be foolish. I would get arrested. So I did what was insane. My friends then came to pick up my baby and my 2 youngest daughters that were 3 and 5 at the time. They had been staying with me for a couple months, and handed them over, and they drove my children to my husband in Independence, Oregon. Marty Warner is his name. And they said it was the most awful memory they have to this day. And my kids were just screaming, my baby screaming. And when they gave them to my husband, he said, "What do I feed it?" He had never taken care of the baby, and I'd been away from him. He had never met my mother-in-law, and so my mother-in-law and my husband were going to be my baby's new mother. And it was, I went into shock. I had to go to the hospital that day and rent a breast pump. And that night, I was definitely in shock. And thankfully, there have been beautiful people who have shown up in my life, you today, but I stayed with a friend in Corvallis, Oregon, Lynn Eisler, and Debbie Custis stayed there that night. And they both slept in front of the doorways because I kept getting up saying I needed to go get Zachary. And they just kept telling me, go back, had to go use the breast pump again. It wasn't working, and I was in distress and in shock. And I just knew I just needed my baby. And they stayed with me for several days till the shock wore down. And I will never recover from that time. My son's going to be 21 on July 10th.
Oh.
He has not seen me since he was almost 3 years old. I did see him in 2003 at a football game. He was standing in front of me, and I didn't call his name because I thought it would put him in shock, and he'd go home that night wondering when he could see his mother again, and I had no visitation rights. I did see my other children that night at the football game, but anyway, March 10th is a red letter day for me. I know for all people, all those listening today, there's usually a line in your life, a line before and what happened after. And March 10th was definitely a line in my life. I will never be the same. I don't look at life the same. I became an advocate for myself. I've always been a compassionate person and did my best to help my neighbors and friends and people in my life, but that day changed me. And when I saw
you've become an incredible advocate for so many other protective mothers, and I want to commend you on being able to go through your own grief and the coping skills that you had to learn to survive through all of this, and share those coping skills with thousands of other protective mothers that I know that follow you on Facebook, and that you help with, not just coping skills, but also research and as to why, these men, these fathers, steal children from their mothers. I mean, and that's what this show is about, to figure out why they're doing that, what we can do about it, how we can deal with the grief, and your role in our Protective Mother movement is crucial. I want to kind of go back to when you lost custody of your children. How come you didn't get any visitation with them either? I mean, what did they say? What did they use in court against you? I'm going to assume that they used the breakdown after the birth of your child against you. Right? I mean, that's from what your ex has shared with friends and family, saying that you were in a mental hospital and that you killed yourself. I mean, is this the type of stuff he would say in court?
Well, I did receive a part of the court order on March 10th, 1996. I did receive visitation privileges every other weekend, and some Wednesday nights I believe I was allowed to call my children. Visitation, the first weekend, my older twins were there, Sarah and Rachel. They're my firstborn, and I want to share just on this program that I love all my 8 children. The joy in my life was being a mother. Life has changed every year, even for the protective mothers listening now. Some of them have young children, maybe some teenagers. There's some of us, like Robin Carr and a few others I know, Marilee McLean, there's many of us that's written books. For some of us, we have permanently lost our children. I will go back to March 10th. I did receive visitation privileges. 2 weeks later, I did see my baby. He was white. He had lost weight. I know he was in shock. My younger ones were very much missing me, and my older twins were there to greet me at the door with my baby on their hip.
Wow.
I had engorged breast. I was still just highly distressed, and they said, he's our baby, mother, not yours. And so the whole household, of the older children anyway, were of the mindset that I was this enemy, and I had ruined the home there was no ever, I don't know how to describe this. The abuse of me was like a normal. My older children learned to abuse me. I was kicked, I was beaten, shoved. I went into labor with my 8th child from one of my older teenagers being violent to me. There was a lot going on in that home, even the sexual abuse of my daughters. And so I come into the home. My older daughters are there watching me every moment. I had to stay in his home to visit my children for the weekend, and then I left, and attorneys drove up as I left, and they were interrogating my children afterwards. I passed 4 hours, 4-hour psychological tests with some of the top doctors in Oregon, Dr. Michael May, Dr. Roger Jacobson, so many of them, and I was fine, and they were so glad that I had not died during that period of time when I had a breakdown. I did see a couple of them at the very offset of my severe depression, and my ex-husband would not let me see a doctor alone. He believed he was Lord of our home and Lord of me, and no one would be talking to me alone. So I did not see anybody other than cult leaders during that 20-month period. And I was beaten, I was exorcised for demons, and raped and impregnated. It was very hard to survive. I often wanted to die because I was told that I was cursed by God, even by my ex-husband's mother-in-law. Every day I was just given signals. Even a former senator of Oregon, State Senator Betsy Close would write me, people talking to me about that I'm in sin or else God wouldn't do this to me. So it was a very toxic environment. And the first visitation I got through, and then eventually they would decide when I could see the children or not. Even though there were court-ordered visitations, it was when he and his mother decided I could see them. I would try to call on Wednesday nights, and they wouldn't answer the phone. My children would see me coming to pick them up. They were excited to see me, and he wouldn't let them out of the home. And then one time I was sexually assaulted by my ex-husband on the property at a time I was trying to see my children. And then I used to have to bring a tape recorder because my older daughters were screaming at me that I needed to learn to be a good mother. And they weren't involved in all of the court, even for these years. I don't know. They have, some of them have attended some of the court hearings with their new husbands now. So my son-in-laws have been, I call it, become the flying monkeys, the enablers. They're condoning the abuse of me, and they come to court, and they're happy that I'm homeless. They're happy that I'm destitute. I guess they're happy I can't see my children, even though many of my children are college educated. They have children themselves. There is an onslaught of hatred towards me, and they're all adults now, and I just say now they're making their choices. Mm-hmm. But visitation did go very poorly. For 2 years I attempted to stay in my children's lives, but due to threats, bullying, my ex-husband continuing to treat me in a way he treated me in the home, it affected my health deeply, and I was attempting to get work. I worked at a Target warehouse in Albany, Oregon. I was working 50 hours a week there, working a night job, even just to support myself. I was ordered to pay my wealthy husband exorbitant support, and I hadn't worked outside the home for 20 years. There was just a lot of injustice that compiled, and so in 2 years' time, I had a wonderful mentor in 1997 to now, Dr. Barbara May. She's professor of nursing at Linfield College in Oregon, and she has used my memoir as a college text. I have spoke at Linfield College, and I have spoke at other colleges and events. District Attorney John Harrelson of Corvallis, Oregon, has introduced me at speaking engagements there, and what I'm saying is, at all this time, though, my ex-husband's been telling people I've been in a mental hospital. I've been working, I've been advocating, volunteering, I created an art business, I did professional modeling for several years. I have been writing my children until 2003 when I was told I couldn't anymore, and been writing books and articles, and then I eventually, for 6 years, wrote for the Marine Corps and Leatherneck magazine articles on PTSD, TBI, suicide prevention, and the Montford Point Marines. And so I have been attempting to be a change in this world, but in my world in Corvallis, Oregon, I've been treated as though I am a wicked, evil individual, and none of them address abuse issues. And what's sad is I'm in touch with a lot of wonderful people in Oregon that are advocates and licensed therapists, and some of them are counseling women that are being abused by the same pastors who abused me. And there's women in Roseburg, Oregon, who are being abused by the same pastor who abused me. And he was the one who would not even report the child sexual molestation in our home, and he was counseling the perpetrator and did not report it, and yet he's
So
about...
where's the police in all of this? I mean, I'm going to assume, and I'm sure the viewers are going to assume as well, that you went to the police, that you tried to seek protection, and especially since there are more victims, apparently, of these cults. Did you guys try to come together and unite and try to do something through that particular channel? Or?
Well, it wasn't until years later that I would hear from some women after my book was initially published in 2003. It's called Bon Shia, Making Light of the Dark. People would find me through the internet because Google had a contract with my publisher that all the names in my book comes up for search. But that's how I met, a lot of the people that are being abused by the same people who abused me. I did report the crimes committed against my daughters. The person now is a registered sex offender. He can see my daughters anytime. The family accepts him and shuns me. And so I created this trouble, supposedly. It was supposed to be a church and family secret, and Pastor Bill Hurd from Roseburg, Oregon, did counsel the perpetrator in a church in Monmouth, Oregon, of Pastor Ron Sutter's church, Bridgeport Chapel. And everybody knew about this, but somehow I just didn't fall in line. I did the legal thing. I wanted my daughters to get the help I never got, and I wanted the other person to get help too. And I've been now outcast. I've been shunned. I have been abused in the court system. I did also file in 1999, per my doctor's request and my mentor's, marital rape charges for carrying 2 babies during a time where I was out of the home and unable to care for myself. I was physically and mentally incapacitated, and the prosecutor, District Attorney John Fisher, just dismissed the case. I met with sheriffs. I still have the tape interviews with them, and I have all the documentation that they didn't care. And I also filed in a county in the Dells, Oregon, and that prosecutor didn't care either. My brother was a witness. He was the one who addressed me. He was a fundamental Christian and believed I was, I guess, property to my husband at the time, because if he was an evolved soul, he would have protected me. I would have done that for anyone that was in that condition. But I've been surrounded by, during those 20 years, and since, I've met people in various religious cultures and churches that have legalistic beliefs, and these beliefs do not help men or women become whole. They do not help connect us to the divine. Many people harmed me when I sought safety. They had no compassion for me. They did not care about the torture and abuse I suffered because of their theology, their ideology, and their interpretation of Scripture. They were my judge, jury, and executioner all in one. So I live under an address protection program now. In 98, I went under the District Attorney's Safety Protection Program, and then in 99, I went under a state address protection program. And I've lived in different states, and they've all been wonderful. That's been a help. When I would send gifts to my children, I'd wrap it and it'd be in double postage stamps. People would receive it, unwrap it, and then mail it to my kids, so my ex-husband didn't know where I was. But even the first year I moved into out of state, and my ex-husband filed so many frivolous court motions. I was driving 10, 12 hours every other week to go to court. He would say I'd made disparaging comments in the community, or he was having difficulty getting a babysitter. But there were many involved souls in the community that had heard of the abuse and knew of the abuse that weren't a part of this church structure. So he was blaming me for that. And the other component of this story, too, is my ex-husband has abused many women in the workplace. One of them filed affidavits in my case that are posted even online and in my book and on my website. Her name's Debbie Custis, and she and her husband hid my van the first nights when I sought safety. in 96, and she and her husband have come to court with me. So I do share that with women, um, that when they do seek safety, there will be people that will come out of the woodwork for you.
Mm-hmm. Now, and that's wonderful because, like you said, a lot of people will start shunning you because you were a whistleblower, and you still are a whistleblower. You're not accepting the abuse. You're coming out about the abuse, and you're being retaliated as a result. And the entire unraveling of your life is a result of that, of being a whistleblower. However, what you are putting forward into the world in your support of other mothers is tremendously valuable. So I'm so happy that you are a whistleblower. You know, I would never, ever wish the agony of what you have gone through and are still going through every second of the day. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, you know, not even our abusers. They don't have any idea of what kind of impact they have on our lives and the lives of our children, because they, you know, these in my view, these people have no conscience, you know. They don't know what they're doing. My question, so you kind of addressed how this was handled through the legal system. But I'm sure a lot of the viewers are going to be wondering, like, did you go to Child Protective Services? Did you seek other avenues to seek help to protect your children?
Well, what I did at first, I told you, is my friend Addie Archer from Longview, Washington, had been a court reporter with me when I was 19 and 20. So she had seen me during the time I was broken and was so thankful I was well again. She saw me before I birthed my 8th child. She did come to help me so I could secretly go to an attorney during the day, and I took boxes of files to him and reported the abuse, and he recommended I get a restraining order, and then I would go to the sheriff for my children, which I did, all those things, but everything failed. The one thing, my daughters I even had with me, and I attempted to start getting them counseling, but they were taken from me. So I do not believe they got any professional counseling after that. My ex-husband is a follower of Bill Gothard and the other Dave Hunt, Mary Pride. There's a lot of biblical fundamentalists out there that don't believe in counseling, that believe psychology is from Satan, and so children are just exercised for demons or prayed over in kind of situations. That's what happened to me during my breakdown. They'd exercised me for demons, told me I had a Jezebel spirit. Pastor Bill Hurd told me that I had just not learned how to submit, and this is why God was doing this to me, and he'd have me get down on my knees in front of him and my ex-husband during many sessions in Roseburg, Oregon, and he was using the Bill Gothard Institute. Bill Gothard now has had to step down. It's been a huge crusade for many decades of legalism, and the Dugard family, if you are following them, my life was very much like that, homeschooling and, you know, the large family. Anyway, Bill Gothard just had to step down. I guess there's many women suing him for sexual assault. That is a organization that is very unsafe. But I was left there in 1994 in the spring. My ex-husband, Mr. Jim Logan from Bill Gothard Institute, and Pastor Bill Hurd from Roseburg, Oregon, all recommended I be left in Chicago, Illinois till I learned how to submit better. And they exorcised me for demons, told me I was a witch at the Bill Gothard Institute in Chicago. And I was followed every day, and it was so oppressive. I did not think I would survive it. And I actually left that month. I knew if I stayed there, I'd be dead. And so I had enough money with me that I got a taxi. I ran away. They were watching me day and night, but I did run away and got on a plane back to Portland, Oregon. I told them there was a round trip ticket, and this was before 9/11, so they were able to allow me on the plane. I went back home and I stayed with my brother. But another form of punishment during that time, per my ex-husband, his churches, cult groups, and all these pastors, they thought to help me during this time I was broken. They said to punish her, to leave her in a halfway house in Killingsworth, It's called The Wings of Love for men right out of the state penitentiary in Oregon. And so I was left there at a time I could hardly talk. I couldn't feed myself or clothe myself or sleep. And I was in a very vulnerable place mentally, physically, and I stayed there. And I had no rights. And that's why I think new laws need to be made too for situations like this. My brother would even visit me, and he didn't believe he had a right to take me home with him. And it's funny, the next year when we were in court, he was asked about it, and the house was infested with lice and rats. We would use shovels every day to just kill the rats. And it was a very frightening time. But I saw him, my brother, on the witness stand. I had never seen him cry. And when my attorney asked him about my stay at the Wings of Love halfway house, he just broke down and wept. And that's just another obscene part of my life. I will have memories forever, and those pictures are posted in my book. It looks like a concentration camp, and the barbed wire is facing the inside. But that is where my ex-husband and his pastors thought I needed punished to, they said, break me to the will of God. These are Baptist, Evangelical, Missionary Alliance, Pentecostal Assembly of God type people. So it's not your far-fetched cults. And I barely survived that. And the only reason I think I stayed alive is I knew I had children, and to die or to kill myself would be too much of a scar for them to bear. But I didn't have much to live for either, because my life was just daily torture. And there's a beautiful article I've posted even on Facebook today called Psychological Murder, and even women and doctors who've written about my story in reviews, they share about my ex-husband to continually impregnate me, even when I could not care for myself, for times when I was blind or catatonic. And I had 11 pregnancies, 8 children in those years, and homeschooling and no outside contact. And there was probably dozens of cults during that time, and no sleep. The joy of life was my children, but it was definitely not a life that cherished me in any way to help my health get better. But I believe
so explain to the audience, because I'm sure that when people hear your story, they're probably wondering, well, when you had your first child, why didn't you just leave when things got oppressive? Explain how you were stuck in that.
Well, when I was younger, I need to go back a little bit. This is the difficult part of my life to speak about, besides all the other chapters of decades. But I'll go back to answer your question to my childhood. My childhood started out, I grew up at 6 years old. During that time, my great uncle was a favorite uncle of my father's. My father was brutally beaten with chains and whips from the time he was 4 years old to adult. He went into the Air Force and was a successful pilot. But I believe he was damaged, of course, from that type of treatment. His great uncle a few times intervened, and so I think he had favorable feelings towards this great uncle. His name was Herschel Stonebreaker. In my young years, my uncle Herschel executed his 16-year-old daughter and attempted to murder his wife, had raped all his 3 daughters. He only went to prison at Walla Walla State Prison for a few years. When he came out, and I've learned this since in my research and even his name and all his court trials online, and through family and neighbors at that time, they've told me, this information as I've asked a few questions. He was not supposed to be around young girls or live in the town we lived in, because his ex-wife lived there. But he did live with us in Kennewick, Washington, after he got out of prison. I remember visiting him while he was in prison and was just told it was where he worked. But he lived with us in the upstairs of our home. My father was gone a lot as a pilot, but my mother was a very cruel woman, and she was just as sadistic as my ex-husband. And she forced me to go into his upstairs bedroom every night. My uncle also had a horrible drinking problem, but I was raped for many years as a child. And I remember Christmas Eve night, my father would usually be home. That as a pilot, that was when I remember him home on the holidays. So I remember being in my own bed at that time. I did have a younger brother that was 2 years younger, but he was never harmed, of course, because my uncle preferred girls. I think my grandmother, who also did this to me, and my mother, maybe they thought that they'd keep him home and that he'd not go back to prison by just sacrificing me, but he did. I heard as an adult after my divorce, I went back to that city and I'd heard he had court hearings from raping other girls, even while he was raping me. And my family spent lots of money for attorney fees to help him so he didn't have to go back to prison. I guess they won those cases, but all the same time they were still sending me to his room. But I grew up at 6 years old. I remember praying to the universe, creator, higher power, if I live through this, I want to help other people. Sadly, through the years, there was no help, and I had a grandfather too, that brutally beat me. A few times I think I was near death. I had the German measles while also being brutally beaten, while also having sexual assault. There was just a lot on my body and mind at that time. As a young adult in high school, I was a straight A student. I was co-valedictorian, president of Honor Society, a pilot at age 17, and a court reporter at 19. My ex-husband met me on the Vancouver-Portland bus in January of 1974 when I was just 18, and I didn't ever give him my phone number, but on the bus we all were talking just about different events. I might have been even talking about my pilot training, which I was still going through along with court reporter training. And within a week, my ex-husband was on the doorstep of our home. I had never received counseling. I didn't even know how to get away from my unsafe family. And so I believe many of us have a red X on our forehead. That's not an insult. It's just a fact. If you've been incredibly harmed, whether you be a man or a woman, you will be more of a target, a prey to predators. And that means if it's a priest, they target children of impoverished families. And we've watched the movie Spotlight, incredible movie. I feel Spotlight is very much part of our corrupt family court system. And the same thing, it's just a different mirror of it. In the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, they let it go on. They knew about it, and just thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of young children have been raped. And
so your future husband at that time, he was your boyfriend. He pretended to be like a savior type of person. Is that kind of how it unfolded, or
no?
No.
He was at Oregon State University, and I then got a job as a court reporter in Longview, Washington, and a bailiff clerk and secretary in the Superior Court. And he transferred his master's project to Longview, Washington, where he knew I had just moved. And he literally sat on the stairs across from the courthouse to see me every day. In these days, it would be called legal stalking. In those days, I just did not know how to even get safe from my own family or get safe from him. There were just people in my life that had control and power over me. And I don't know if I'd really call it dating, but he at one time, a late night, came to my apartment. He knew where I lived, and he brutally raped me. And in those days, I had no one to talk to. In our legalistic fundamental church system at that time, in the 70s and 80s, they called it the Jesus movement, but there was a lot of really sick people in that movement, along with even today, whether it be the Bill Gothards, or I find even a Southern Baptist who asked for the full submission of women, that women have very few rights. It's not much different, but they told me I was damaged goods, and a lot of friends and people around me, and that was the mentality. So in many ways, I thought I just had to marry him. I was damaged goods, and there was just no way in my psyche that I knew how to get away from any of them. It took me many decades to get away from my own immediate family. I posted on my website, I have a link called Resources for Mothers of Lost Children and Trauma Survivors, but I tried to post articles about trauma bonding, Stockholm Syndrome. These are things that happen to you even as a child. You have trauma bonding even to very abusive, violent families, and even our children that are taken from us. I know that they were treated violently. I saw the abuse. I used to get my body in front of them when my ex-husband was a rageaholic coming out of the woods with a log or his fraternity board or belts. And even after the divorce, he used to beat my children while they were on the phone with me, and I'd hear them cry. They were just little, 3 and 5 years old. So there's a point in time, you just need to get safe. And what you talked about is, what is the dilemma? And I've talked with like Melissa Barnard, who writes incredible articles for mothers of lost children, another advocate. But there's a beautiful article she wrote called The Vengeful Father Syndrome. But our choices, when Oprah tells us and safe homes tell us and doctors tell us, get safe. If we report abuse, we will most likely lose our children. Even the Child Justice had a fundraiser, and attorneys there were telling women there now that they tell women, don't report abuse. You will lose your children. We can't disappear. We have children. We'll have a baby. We have toddlers. We can't just abandon them. That's nothing in our psychological makeup. Even my ex-husband threatened me for decades if I tried to get safe, because even after my first children, immediately there were cults. He was a part of the People of Praise cult in Corvallis, Oregon. It was an extreme cult. They married each other. I ran away from that cult. I was interrogated. I was shunned by the community, not just them, but they had friends within the community. So I've known what shunning's been like ever since 1985, and it's cruel. I say shunning's a cruel form of ridicule, but
it's pure terrorism, if you ask me.
But I had then 3 children while we were in the cult, and then I left, and then I had my 4th child, and then I left the Catholic Church. I am a deeply spiritual woman. I am not religious, and there's just patriarchal religion has not served me well, and I do not see good fruits of it anywhere, to tell you the truth. And it can be from one smaller version to an extreme version. It's all the same. There's power and control and greed and more control and terrorism within it. And people interpret scripture in thousands of different ways, and there's somewhat of a joke that there's 4,200 religions in the world, and some people believe that there's only one true religion of those 4,199. But deep down inside, I have written in my book that there's some people who are so heavenly conscious they are no earthly good. And although there's decent people in all faiths and there's compassionate people, often these religions can cause mental illness in people. They are obeying scripture, and yet deep down in themselves they know something is seriously wrong with even the control and the abuse. So I have written deeply about this in my own memoir and my own experiences, and I have my own observations. I honor everybody's journey, but I do say if you are intolerant of other people or hateful, it's time that you reevaluate your spiritual path. And
I would say, yeah.
Yes,
what kind of belief system is that, right?
But as far as children, I had children and nowhere to go, no one to tell. Even when I tried to go to counselors, some of them were infiltrated from the cults. And the priest I talked to, that didn't get me anywhere. He was friends with the priest that had abused me. So it went on for years. Then there was home church within our family. My ex-husband home churching us, bringing in more cults, more oppressive people. And I was homeschooling and exhaustion, and basically escaping isn't a part of your plan. Your plan every day is surviving, taking care of the children. If I got 2 hours sleep from just all the workload, and my ex-husband brought in more workload too, that was a good day. And so you can't plan an escape when you're exhausted and you're beaten down and you're being abused.
And there's little children. I mean, it's not so easy to just pick up and leave.
I did, though. I did. In January of 1996, I loaded my 3 young children, and friends came there. They were all shaken. Some of my story is a cross between Sleeping with the Enemy and What's Love Got to Do with It, but they were shaking. Everybody was afraid of my ex-husband, and they still are. There's people that he has called in the early morning hours. If they've helped me, he has told them that they needed to get under the blood of Jesus, and I wasn't under the blood of Jesus. And there's just been bizarre things that people don't want to be a part of. So they'll tell me, I want to help you, but I am afraid of your husband and his pastors and people in his life. My children are a part of ministries now. I even talked the other day again. I worry for some of these ministries, and I share that in an article I wrote just this week called The Wall of Shame. Marty Warner and the pastors, ministries, and churches that support him.
Let's pull that up. Why don't you share your screen and pull up that article, because it's really good, and it also has some excellent links on there. And that might be helpful for other protective mothers who are dealing with similar situations.
I'm at the desktop. I'm trying to get to the right screen.
So go to the bottom with your browser, and you see this button that says share screen. There you go.
Okay, and I'll get to the article. There it is. Can you see it?
Yeah. So that way, and the viewers can also find your website.
This is my family, my 8 children and ex-husband. The photo was entitled Family of the Year. It was my 7th daughter's wedding picture. I've never been invited to graduations or weddings. Here I have 8 children through or grandchildren, but that photo was entitled Family of the Year. This is the halfway house I lived at as punishment to break me to the will of God. Notice the barbed wires turned inwards, and I lived in this part in a little room, lice-infested couch. And that's me with my baby, Zachary David, when he was first born. And we escaped soon after that, and I lost custody of him when he was 6 months. This is one of my favorite quotes. To those who abuse, the sin is yours, the crime is yours, and the shame is yours. To those who protect the perpetrators, blaming the victims only masks the evil within, making you as guilty as those who abuse. Stand up for the innocent or go down with the rest. And this is by Flora Jessup, who escaped a Mormon pluralistic marriage community. And this is my ex-husband's family. They all supported him. Most of them are Catholic or evangelical. They knew about the abuse and support him to this day. Some of them have helped brainwash my children to hate me. This is Pastor Ron Sutter and his wife, who supported my ex-husband through the restraining order period. Pastor Bill Hurd and his wife Linda in Roseburg, Oregon, continues to abuse women and children. They have many, I call their body count is huge, lots of casualties. This is Director Rich Burns of In Faith Ministries. My daughter Sarah and her husband Ben Bobita work in this ministry. It's a missionary ministry, and he said, I just don't, I asked him, I said, 4 of your employees have abused me and were part of my, the time when I lost my children. They supported my ex-husband and have turned my children against me. And he said, I just didn't have a correct assessment of my story. That was our conversation this week.
It's outrageous. So this man is basically telling you that you don't have a correct assessment of your own life.
Correct. And I asked him, have you been educated much about domestic violence and rape and abuse issues? And he said he had a PhD. And,
in what?
And this is, excuse me, we will be nice, won't we? This is Pastor Steve and Kay Dixon in Salem, Oregon, and they're part of the In Faith Ministries too. She used to call me up when I lost my children and told me I had torn my home down with my own bare hands. And this was when I was trying to get my daughters safe and going to court and reporting crimes, and she was of no help and also helped in turning my children against me. My oldest daughter and her husband, Sarah and Ben Bobita, they work for In Faith Ministries. This is my son-in-law, Jesse White, who has a PhD about my life story. He works for the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde in Oregon. As an engineer, I've called their Confederate tribes, and I just said, one of your employees has left many degrading and libel comments about me online on newspapers, and I published them in my memoir. I also published them in an article called, this is the article about him called Meet Jesse White, and basically I believe in exposing enablers. I believe it's just as important to expose enablers as it is to expose the men who are abusing women and children.
Absolutely.
Enablers, they call it flying monkeys. There's an excellent article I have on my resource list at my website. I collected about 100 articles and books specifically for mothers of lost children to understand the corruption in family court, and for trauma survivors, understanding how to get safe even from your immediate family, about Stockholm syndrome, trauma bonding. But he tells me that I was never abused. My ex-husband's a pillar of the community, that my ex-husband never abused the children, and that I am a liar, and none of this happened. And I wrote him and told him, shame on you.
Mm-hmm.
I said, this is just the same as telling a Holocaust victim that they tattooed themselves and they never were in concentration camps. But I wrote an article about him, and when his lies were online, they still are, many people wrote him and said, so, the rapes either happened or they didn't, or her breakdown happened and didn't. This 20 years of court happened or it didn't. Have you gone to the courthouse? Have you looked at the 2-foot file? Have you ever watched any? I have all copies, double copies in 2 different states in case someone attempts to destroy the court copies. But I have all 20 years of 45 court hearing transcripts, court audio tapes, court videotapes, 45 hours of deposition tapes. I spent 5 years watching them all, documenting, collecting all the affidavits from the court hearings. They're all documented in my book. In fact, I want to show people who are watching, let me get my book here, my court hearings and all the motions, people and attorneys that look at it say it's longer than a criminal's case. This was just a couple years. I'll find the docket here, but
why don't you stop sharing your screen so we can see you and the book?
I'll finish with, this is Bill Gothard, and if you just Google his name, Deggards are a part of his movement, but a lot of people recovering and in therapy from this Bill Gothard Institute movement. Incredible legalism, and many of my ex-husband's friends and pastors were involved with that movement that abused me. But, anyway, for those who want to study about patriarchy and how it affects our court system, our patriarchal church system is the same is in court. As women, when we come before a judge, we've reported crimes, we've reported abuse. I believe they look at us the same as some of these patriarchal pastors. We just haven't figured out how to submit, and we have no protection.
You have no rights in the United States either, right? And the viewers should also realize that there's no rights for women in the Constitution, in the American Constitution, and no rights for children. And this is why individuals like this and cults like this can get away with this level of abuse. And this is where the real change needs to happen. The Equal Rights Amendment needs to get passed in all states. There's only a few more states needed to have that passed, so all protective mothers can actually get their rights and fight for their rights. Because as where you all are now as protective mothers in the United States, you basically have no rights, and I think most women don't even realize that.
Yes, and Lundy Bancroft and Dr. Jack Stanton, he's from Portland University. They've both written excellent articles about, what children's rights are that have violent fathers. They've both written incredible articles. So those are listed in my resource page, but that's a question that is asked, that here people tell us to go get safe from the violence. But then the courts either take our children from us, and then we're having to do visitation with these violent men who then become even more violent and more cruel. And it never ends. A lot of us have been legally stalked the rest of our lives. We don't have a life. I tried to go back to college in Oregon. A lot of people wanted me to see if I could go back even for a degree in law. And so I started in college. I was living out of my car at the time, working. I had 3 court hearings at the time, and then all of a sudden there was an Oregon State Appeals that I had to go to law libraries to learn how to write a legal brief, and I gave up on college. I realized my life wouldn't ever be the same as other people, and a lot of money is also, even if you're poor, you have to file, you have to spend time, writing these briefs. It's all just to break you. And my ex-husband, and he's a Christian attorney, even after the divorce, said, "We'll break you." It's the same words that I was told when I lived in the halfway house, to break me. So there is just no respect for women within this patriarchal religion. And I'm showing, I don't know if you can see it right now, but Melissa Barnard, she wrote this incredible article called "Restore the Good Name of Protective Mothers." And it starts out saying, who wears the scarlet letter? We do. Even in our workplaces, even in our social settings, when people hear I lost my children, I never drank. I have no criminal record. I was never violent with my children. I protected them. I protected them from the cults. I protected them from my husband and his cult leaders. And I'm the one who wears the scarlet letter now. I don't believe that I should be, but even people, they judge, of course. If you're not an evolved soul and if you haven't studied in these issues, people judge us. What did you do? What did you do?
No.
And some people think we, serve time in prison. But I say, even Lifetime Life magazine and other magazines, I quoted this in my book, prisoners at tax expense are allowed to keep their babies 9 months in prison. They can be with their own children, even committing crimes. And a lot of us are protective mothers. We've committed no crime, but our babies are immediately taken from us. So we live in a very sick society, and I just recommend, I know there's protective mothers watching this, but hopefully there's friends and family that will see this show and other shows you will do in the future, and that they'll read these articles. They'll study our stories. They'll read the books, and they'll become advocates too. And hopefully laws can change to where we're not in front of a judge who is as cruel and abusive as the men we've left. That there'll be a board of evolved souls that understand domestic violence, rape, child abuse, child rape cases, and that women and children will be protected.
Well, society is responsible. It's not just the court system or our ex-husbands. The people that are facilitating this and are enabling it, flying monkeys, as we call them, which is a term for enablers of narcissists. These are the folks that really also need to think about what they're doing and take responsibility for the choices that they make by enabling and facilitating these abusers. Because when they do so, they are participating in the abuse. They are just as guilty as the ones who are inflicting the direct abuse. That website that you just shared is from Mothers of Lost Children, for those viewers who are not familiar with that website. It's a very good website by Melissa Barnett, who's also a protective mother, and she has a lot of resources on that website. A great person to get in touch with as well if you are a protective mother and you're watching this program right now. And on your website, you also have a bunch of links to resources, correct? You want to show us where we can find that?
Yes. Okay, just a moment here. Okay. I'm going to get back to my website, and I'll go to the page. The website has a blog, and I've written a lot of articles. Excuse me here. Back up here. Here's the resource list. It's under the More section at my website of CoralanikATheill.com. And it's basically a resource list that has articles and books and film. And my favorite quote, "Nothing justifies the minimization or removal of a fit and loving parent from a child's life. Nothing."
It's an absolute powerful statement. And this is an incredible website that you have built. You've done so much research and gathered so much information. And I know that you share this on your Facebook page as well.
Yes.
You might want to show the Facebook page so people can like it and follow you.
Here we go.
Because I know that for me as a protective mother, your website and the quotes that come by are extremely helpful to me. When this first was all happening to me, I had no idea, what narcissism was. I had to start reading about it. I started reading Lundy Bancroft's books, and I started looking at your website and your quotes. And it helps to educate yourself, because when you're dealing with a malignant narcissist, it's so important to realize that you shouldn't take it personal, even though what's happening to you is the most personal thing that could ever happen to you. It's never your fault. These people have a personality disorder. They will probably never change. I looked at research on this, and 98% of narcissists don't ever achieve normal brain status. This is all, you can scan for these disorders with MRIs, which is one of the things that I think should happen within court and custody evaluations. If there's any suspicion that the court is dealing with narcissists or sociopaths or pedophiles, all these things can be tested with MRIs. And this should weigh in custody decisions. Simple as that.
Yes, it should. I have an excerpt of a short letter I want to share in some of my advocacy. Throughout the years, you have asked me, what have I tried? I did mentor with Dr. Barbara May for now 18 years. She's been an incredible mentor, and she has written affidavits after affidavits for my court hearings. The judges didn't care. She was very concerned for my health when I was homeless, and just the court hearings just never stopped, and they did not. They just dismissed her. And I have, that's been my wonderful gift from Seeking Safety. It's Dr. Barbara May in Portland, Oregon, professor of nursing. I did meet with U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley in July 2014. The letter is up on my blog. His assistant, Mr. Joel Corcoran, used to work with battered mothers as an attorney in Portland, Oregon. And he read my website, many of my articles, and was alarmed and shocked. He asked me to create a document of the 20 years of 45 court hearings so that they could look over my own case history to see if there was state or federal laws that they could improve. And also one of my friends, Sergeant Major Brian K. Jackson, retired Marine, wrote to Mr. Joel Corcoran and U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley. And this is a short excerpt of his letter, which I found, it's just profound. It speaks in advocacy for all of us protective moms. He says, as I watch the news today, I see all sorts of other cases pretty similar to Coral Theill's. The thing that I do not understand about our system is why or how can we allow what happened to Coral, and is still happening, to happen. Some are held against their will, raped, battered, abused, and then glorified, as are the three ladies from Ohio. Guys are considered heroes as a result of being the person to make a phone call to the authorities about it. Then we have those in the same situation, and maybe even worse, who are blamed, ostracized from society, stripped not only of their children, but of their dignity, ridiculed, and even forced into hiding, and receive absolutely no support from anyone in the justice system, who, by the way, are supposed to be by the people, of the people, and for the people. And I think that speaks for all of us. We're happy women like that. The three ladies from Ohio were rescued, and many people surrounded them, but you don't see that in our cases. And we often have been tortured and battered just the same. But if we have been married to the man who did or the same or worse to us, and we've been held hostage because we had children with him, when we get safe, we are sued, we lose our children, we're legally stalked, and we're shunned by community. Many of us end up homeless. We end up on America's statistic as homeless women due to escaping domestic violence, and things need to change.
Yeah, there's this prevailing myth that when a couple goes through divorce and there are children involved, that the mother gets custody of the children. And, Phyllis Chesler, Dr. Phyllis Chesler has actually, brought in data from over the last 20 years that shows that 82% of abusive fathers who fight for custody are granted full custody of the children. And so what's really important, is one of the reasons why I'm doing the show, is to educate the regular folks out there who have no idea that this is going on. But we need to get rid of that myth, and we need to get those real numbers out there and show people that what's actually happening is that these abusive fathers, in most cases, they get full custody of their children, and then society thinks, because of that myth, they think there's something wrong with us, and they put us in, like you put so well, they shun us. As a result, they think there's something wrong with us, whereas this is actually the pattern that's happening, and one of the reasons why this is happening is that when our children are taken from their mothers, the courts know that we as mothers will never stop fighting for our children because it's inherent in our nature. And this is how the system makes money off of us, because we keep on spending money on attorneys and guardian ad litem's and evaluators and all these folks involved in that family court industry can charge their own outrageous hourly fees. So this is a business, and this is one of the reasons why courts are facilitating abuse. But I also want to talk about paternal entitlement and the fact that men are rewarded for their abuse. Now, we use the word patriarchy and patriarchal. I use the word patriarchal fascism. Let's talk a little bit about that term, because it's not a gender issue necessarily. We've talked about this, you and I have talked about this amongst each other, and I wanted to kind of ask what your definition is of patriarchy.
Well, I have a few definitions. Let's see, I'm going to see if I can find it here real quickly, because I wrote something down that I felt would help define one of my favorite definitions is from Carol Christ. She says patriarchy is simply not the domination of women by men. Patriarchy is an integral system in which men's control of women's sexuality, private property, war, violence, and the institution, conquest, rape, slavery arise and thrive together. The different elements are so intertwined that it is impossible to separate one as a cause of the other. Patriarchy is an integral system of interlocking oppressions enforced by violence. The whole of the patriarchy system is legitimated by patriarchal religions. That is why changing religious symbols is necessary if we hope to create alternatives to patriarchal religions. Basically, it's...
Why don't you stop sharing your screen while we discuss this so we can see you?
Yes.
So that's a really good link. Yeah.
The Christian church, many other people knew I was being abused, but I believe there's so many ill people within the church. They don't care. They haven't taken care of their own abuse issues, whether they be the perpetrator or have been abused themselves. And so when you go to the church with domestic violence, rape, child abuse issues, it's the worst place to go. And statistics-wise, the people who work in therapy and mental health, they will say that too. You can find that in any study and research. And so I do not recommend anybody to go to anybody that's in the patriarchal system for help. And then there's another part too, that you have to proceed with caution in therapy. If you've lived long enough, you've heard people have been abused in therapy. Yes,
well, abuse can happen anywhere, and for some of the protective mothers, a church is a safe place. I really think it depends on the way it is run and the way it is experienced. And I'm not against religion personally. I think I've seen it help for many protective mothers. It's important to hold on to faith and hope. And if that is a way, if that works for you, then, I say go for it, because the last thing we want is to have these narcissists drive us to suicide. That's their ultimate goal. So anything that helps you to prevent that from happening, I'll support. I think the extreme versions of what you're describing, particularly the cults are dangerous, and cults don't not necessarily only happen within religious institutions. They also happen in political institutions. They also happen in any type of organized, group. It can even happen in sports. Can happen in any type of organized groups of human beings where there are issues of power and control. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to steer to. Patriarchy, when we think about it, it sounds like a gender issue, but I don't necessarily think it's about gender.
Right.
I believe that women can also be behaving in a patriarchal way if they are pushing control and trying to force their own ways on other people. As a matter of fact, in my court cases, many of the judges that handled my cases were women. So I think, and this is an important point, because when we're talking about patriarchy, what does it mean? I think the discussion, it's important to realize that women participate in patriarchal ways of coercive control. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. I did find the quote that's from my memoir, just speaking about patriarchy. I said that I believe that the extremely patriarchal view of the roles of women and men in our society harm everyone and hinder our human evolution and ability to live fulfilling and mentally healthy lives. Both for men and women, it alienates us from each other and isolates us from the divine. I agree with author James Redfield. He writes, a group consciousness which speaks constantly of separation and superiority, our religious and legal systems, produces a loss of compassion on a massive scale, and loss of compassion is inevitably followed by a loss of conscience. I believe our goal should not be eliminating religion, but illuminating the tactics by which it commands obedience and discourages doubt, so that people can recognize these and reject them. It is most important that we all make up our own minds, use reason to guide us, and do not passively rely on faith or authority of religious leaders.
Yeah, think for yourself, everybody. That's the most important thing. The spark of the divine is in your heart, and if you need to get answers to questions, it's advisable to try and get quiet inside yourself to let the answers come from within you, because we all hold all the knowledge that there would ever be to be attained. Of course, we can get knowledge from other people and from other opinions and thoughts and ideas, but in the end, you need to touch it to your own heart, to your own value, to your own identity, to what you feel is right? So developing the intuition would be more of a maternal quality if we're going to put labels on everything. But still, it's important that I believe, as humanity, to move forward and where we are today is to develop that intuition and to develop that, to really be in touch with who you are and what's important to you, instead of having other people create thoughts and beliefs and values for you. Because like the quote that you're just reading out, it's that organized belief where it's forced upon you that's not coming from your own heart. That's a form of indoctrination, and it's so dangerous. I mean, look what's happened to you. It's ripped your life apart. And
I wanted to share one more detail too about just the ramifications of our lives. And I posted this yesterday on my Facebook page, and I know it's happened to other people, but I don't think the courts, the religious groups, even can begin to fathom what all this court orders do to. I mean, besides expense, it was $90,000 the first month and $150,000. Now 20 years of my time and 45 court hearings, being sued later. But my brother died 7 years ago this month. I'm speaking about it because it's an anniversary. He died July 8th in a plane crash. We were both trained as pilots, but he was a pilot that day, and his plane did crash. And I wasn't allowed to attend his funeral. I have no visitation privileges, and my ex-husband called the pastor, and my brother and him were not close, of course, but he called the pastor, say he was bringing the young children and was going to attend my brother's funeral. I cannot be anywhere where my young children, minor children, were without being arrested or getting contempt orders or being sued, like the last time my son hugged me a few years before. So here's my only sibling, my only brother I took care of, and when we were younger, we were like twins, but I could not go to his funeral. I had to fax my eulogy for my brother, and ended up, eventually my husband did not show up, I believe. But I just share that. I don't think people even understand the beginning of our lives and the many years of ramifications. And the pastors that are involved with my ex-husband all condone this. It's like, I think they all believe that they're a part of God's punishment to me, that they're a part involved in punishing me. And we need to all become more evolved. I just find it obscene, my life, the experiences I and others have experienced. But I just wanted to add that to the program, that most people do respect another human being when you have lost a close member of your family. But I've never was allowed to adequately grieve. I wasn't allowed to be there.
It's outrageous, outrageous. And I believe, when I listen to your story, I believe these people need to be, and you're doing this, you're making this public. We need to hold these people accountable in the court of public opinion. If we can't get justice in the courtroom, then we need to out these people and isolate them and place consequences to their behavior, because what's happened to you is downright criminal. These are human rights violations, of the highest level.
I have filed with the International Human Rights Commission, and I have a USA United Nations case number. I have filed with the Women's Coalition with that. And like I say, I do meet with state senators. My book is in many libraries in Oregon, including Roseburg, Oregon, and my book is in New York at the Matilda Joslyn Gage Religious Freedom Room and their library. So even though I do not have public relations, your story, does go out there, and I do believe it changes people. Learning that America, even on the 4th of July coming up, here I've lived in America, and not one single person who's committed crimes against me has ever been prosecuted. And ever since a young girl, and even to this day, I've had to experience crimes and pay my abusers. I pay my rapist. I pay him child support. He took my baby, and I've not seen my baby, and I'm now treated like the criminal.
Yeah, how is that the land of independence, right?
Right. We go to other countries supposedly to help free the women there, so there's less oppression, but there's tens of thousands of women laying on the ground here in America. When you cut out their hearts, you literally murder them the day you take their children. We live, we go on. I say I'll never move on, but you're literally murdered, your heart's cut out. And I don't know how the people that are a part of this can live with themselves, but this has gone on for centuries. People that have no conscience, no heart, and who claim they are God's workers here.
Well, that's the obscene part of it, that they claim to be working on God's behalf while they're actually inflicting the most gross human rights violations ever. And that's it's like the maximum amount of hypocrisy that I don't know how these people live with themselves either. I believe they have no conscience. They have no connection to divine source.
That's right.
They just claim they do because they want that for their personal power, and personal power in a way to in a sense of control. There's nothing wrong with personal power if you use it for the intent of bringing harmony and peace and joy to the world. But if you use your personal power only to enrich yourself by controlling others and brainwashing others, then you are part of the problem.
Yes. And besides, I was just going to share, a lot of women do write me to ask how, they're surviving a few months or a few years, and they ask about ideas of survival. That's a common thing. Even when I was broken, I just wanted to meet somebody who had gone to the depth of hell and was still alive and had come back on the other side. And I'm just thankful to be here. The journey has been not pretty, but the gift is connecting with people like you and other protected mothers, and I call them the lifter-uppers, the people who show up in my life that have been kind and shown me compassion. But there are a few books I recommend. There's one called The Dance by Oriah Mountain Dreamer, a beautiful book. She's also gone through a lot, but it can help you reframe trauma. And there's another book called Women Who Run with the Wolves.
Yes, awesome.
By Dr. Clarissa Estes. She has a website.
I have it somewhere here in my
Yes, I have it here too. Oh, here. And those are two books that are just so beautiful. There's another one of Dr. Gabor Mate, M-A-T-E. He works, he has a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, but he has just a beautiful way of speaking about compassion and how with all victims, whether it be drug addicts or people who are homeless, whatever people have been through, that we have to bring into our lives and our psyches another way of looking at one another and feeling interconnected and showing compassion. But those are just a few ideas of books that have helped me.
This is also a really good book, Trauma and Recovery by Geerte.
Yes, one of my favorites. She has beautiful quotes about perpetrators and why so many people side with the perpetrators, because the perpetrator asked them to do absolutely nothing. And right. Yes, victims, we need remembering, acknowledgement, compassion, help. The perpetrator needs nothing. He just, but sometimes he does enlist them to be his, they call it flying monkeys. They do more harm. They share more lies. They damage you and shame you and blame you. And I think at this time of the world, we need to stop blaming victims. We need to rise above the rape culture and start to become healthy, evolved human thinking beings. What's happened up to now is not working at all.
Well, one of the ways that you were able to become this very strong woman that you are now is by empowering yourself, by writing about it, by studying this, by looking at why is this happening and what can I do about it. And I really would like to motivate my viewers, the other protective mothers going through this, to not necessarily write about it, because that can also be re-traumatizing, but to seek support, to seek information that's nurturing, that helps you get answers to why this is happening. A lot of the protective mothers that I interview, they'll say throughout, as they're telling their story, like, it was my fault, or I shouldn't have done this or that. But really, when you're dealing with malignant narcissists, none of this is your fault. And it's not about blaming. We're just dealing with people with severe personality disorders. The best way to deal with it is by trying to get everybody away from these individuals and not engage. We call that the gray rock technique. Maybe you can explain to the audience what the gray rock technique is.
Oh, to basically they are no longer there. Isn't that true? It's like my ex-husband. I didn't ever look at him in court. I did not speak to him. I live under an address protection program. I don't respond in any way. He's no longer there. I do know, I acknowledge him as a fellow human being who is not connected to the divine, and I am not surprised when I move to another state and there's, 3 inches of court orders sitting in a new mailbox under my state protection program from him. I'm his attorney. I've done nothing but seek safety, and I've had to respond to that, else you end up in jail or sued further. But I don't respond to him in any other way other than what I have to do in court. And I just see him.
And also, internally, it's really important. I don't hate my ex-husband, because how can you hate someone who is not even aware of what he's doing? I think it's really important to disconnect from those types of feelings, because they can become bitterness. And of course, it's normal to be angry, and it's normal to have intense grief. And this is also because, there's this feeling of powerlessness, because the system enables and facilitates people with these types of personality disorders, which is really where my anger is at. The way I deal with it, and maybe this is helpful to viewers, is I fight by, like you, sharing links about this, informing people, doing this program, but also helping other mothers when they feel suicidal. I mean, sometimes I deal with 2 or 3 in a day, where via Facebook, where I try to help them by, sharing that it is not their fault, and if they can just take their power back, because if you stay stuck in that feeling of grief, then that is what feeds these narcissists.
Right. So I do want to share that I do believe narcissists know what they're doing. I know there's maybe different views on that, but I'm of the viewpoint that they know exactly what they're doing. And basically, I think, education, educating yourself. For me, I could not believe that a human being would take a baby from a nursing mama. I mean, I'd worked in the courts before, so I knew some things go wrong, but it was such a shock to me that someone could be that cruel. And then there was another deeper shock when I sat in front of Pastor Ron Sutter with some of the women and elders of his church, and I had my breast pump with me. My ex-husband was there and the elders, and I begged to just be able to hold and nurse my baby. And they just did. Sometimes these things have to happen. They viewed me as a mentally ill or, I don't know, damaged person, but I was functioning. I was working 80-hour work weeks. I was going to court, writing, seeing my children, driving. I was doing all the things everybody else does, and I was grateful for my life. I was grateful for I was safe. I was grateful for that I no longer had to live with them. But really, the last 20 years have been a much more intense type of torture. But it was my only choice. I go back. Even Melissa was asking me, what else would you advise? What else could you do? There's nothing. You can't just run away and disappear like we all want to. We have children. There's one woman who did go to Holland and disappeared because her children were being harmed so horribly. But I'm grateful for my life. But I tell women, you will never recover from this. You can go out in the world and you can help society, help others, but as far as moving on from like other tragedies, like, people go through all types of tragedies, even the loss of our close loved ones, and we eventually go through all, the grief, and we will always miss them, but having your children stripped from you forever and for years on end, and then the ones that you nurtured 24/7, I was in the home 18 years, you will never heal from that. I will use the word never. There is nothing on this earth that will heal you from that. It is a psychic shock, and it'll affect you. I still have night terrors 20 years later from the night, that I was giving up my children. You still have effects. I think we have exhaustions. A lot of women have PTSD, which is not a mental disorder. It's a natural occurrence to a traumatic event. Even when I wrote and interviewed Commandant General Amos, he uses the word post-traumatic stress. He does not put the word disorder after it. And that's my interview and article for the Marines. We use PTS. It's not a disorder, and it's not a mental illness. But people sometimes look at us like, what's wrong with you? I would challenge any of the pastors or their wives to go through what I did, to carry babies when you couldn't care for yourself, be dumped in halfway houses, to be exercised for demons, to have 2 hours sleep for 18 years, have, that many pregnancies and dozens of cults. I'm just thankful to be alive, but they have not helped much. And I think many of them have helped push my health further by their helping my abuser. But like I say, I don't believe you ever heal from this type of psychic shock. It's an obscene thing to go through. And every day, too, I receive letters. And, I hope that women can connect with safe people. There's not a lot we can do. There's not a lot changing at this time. There are the Battered Mothers Custody Conference each year with Dr. Mo Hanna from Siena College. People gathered there. But and there's a lot of wonderful writers who've written books and information. But the more information you can understand, and even I know we've addressed this topic on the show, understanding patriarchal religion. I'm not challenging what your faith is, but I'm challenging you to understand patriarchal religion and the base of it. And even go see the movie Spotlight, or go watch the documentary by HBO called Maxima Mea Culpa, Silence in the House of God. 250 deaf boys in a school were raped by a priest for years. They even put flyers on the parishioners' windshields. They went to the district attorney. Nobody helped them. And now you see them as 50-some-year-old men signing and talking about the horror. It's an incredible documentary, but those type of documentaries do mirror our type of severe horror and abuse we're going through. So to understand what's going on in our religious systems at Penn State, why that went on so long, it's to understand what's going on to us. And mostly it's because regular people in our society are turning a blind eye. They don't want to hear it. It's like the Holocaust. They didn't want to hear about it. Yep. They didn't want to hear about it, and millions and millions and millions died. And
these narcissists are you're right, it's a moral corruption, and it's a choice. It's a choice to be morally corrupt. And the people that are enabling this in society are participating in it. And as such, this lawless society, right? That's really what's happening, a society full of human rights violations. That's so damaging. I do believe there are levels of healing possible, and I think one of the things that we can strive for, it would be like what's really missing, and I've talked about this in the introduction. There's about 2 million protective mothers in the United States, and that's a conservative estimate. We need real support. We need actual retreat centers where we can be together, not just with other victims so we can support each other, but where we can get real hands-on healing, alternative healing methods, massage, real therapy, real safety, real nurturing, financial assistance, legal aid. Attorneys. I mean, let's put this out there. If there's people out there and they want to make money, I mean, this would be the way to go. That you would have so many clients if you would start retreat centers like this and have it paid for by insurance companies, because this is like a victim industry. And here is this large group of victims who are not getting the help that we need. So I'm putting that out there. That would be one way for us to.
And there are levels of healing. I'm not saying there's no healing at all, but it's a permanent scar from having your child removed from you forever. And but there are, for me, time has helped me have peace. I've accepted that this is what happened, that I am responsible for my life today, and what am I going to do? My wonderful mentor, Dr. May, always said, if this is all there is, Coral, what are you going to do? I think that's a good question for all of us.
What you're doing is helping an incredible amount of other protective mothers who've lost their children. And you would be surprised when I'm up in the middle of the night and I can't sleep because I'm grief struck or I've had nightmares about my daughter, and I go to your website and I, read the articles that you're posting there, I know I'm not the only one.
That's right.
It gives me coping tools to deal with it, and I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing. You truly have made lemonade out of lemons, and it doesn't replace the loss all the tragedy and abuse that you have endured. But you're carrying your role with grace, in the sense that you're not staying in victim mode. You know what I mean? You've transformed this into a healing tool by sharing this information and by being a beacon of support for others. And so I think that's a beautiful way to heal and to recover.
And I believe that bearing witness is the beginning of healing. That's my own quote. Bearing witness is the beginning of healing. And just bearing witness, being able to talk to you, other mothers talking to people. Now, a lot of us are not validated. A lot of us are shunned or further harmed. But giving voice to the violence, that helps even in our communities. It helps lawmakers when we meet with them to talk about this epidemic. And eventually, our voices will create a critical mass. It has. There are judges now that are being challenged for their rulings, and I find that incredible. That's just wonderful to see that judges are more accountability. Social media helps. Years ago, we didn't have cell phones. There was no social media. I didn't know for years of any other mother who was suffering this. So that helps. Yep. There's a community.
Absolutely.
And I do believe every mother, everybody who is men, women, children who have been harmed in any way, any violent crime against them or this type of violence in our court systems by losing our kids, we all long for justice. We all do. And I believe it's a very positive thing to seek it. I have. I have done so by even writing and documenting.
You're doing so today by being on being on Health for Children. So I want to thank you for your courage in sharing your story, because it's a very personal story, it's a very emotional story, and it's very hard to share. I know that because I've been in your shoes and been on the interviewee side of things. So I want to commend you for your courage. Thank you so very much for being on the show today and our first live episode on CCN TV. So I hope the show will contribute to you getting reunited with your children, so the true healing can begin. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Geerte.
I hope the show was helpful for any viewers who are dealing with similar nightmares. And I want to thank you all for tuning in, everybody. And I hope to see you all again next Saturday for another episode of Health for Children. Have a great day, everybody, and blessings to all the protective mothers out there and their children. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.